How you doing, Ben? Good morning, team. Indeed, good morning. Hope you're doing great, my man. What do we got here? Monkey Rides Bike. Good morning, fellow Bitcoiners. B for victory. Bon matin. Good morning, Bitcoiners. CK in the house. Nice to see you, CK. Good morning, Breakup Squad. That's a good name. We're a squad. We like being a squad. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Dan. Robert. Good morning. Let's talk. We got lots to talk about. Bon matin, Bitcoiners. Good morning on this beautiful day. Bitcoin has reached 888 plus million total transactions. I didn't know that. That's good news. Good news. Good morning, team. Good morning, Daniel. Good morning, plebs. Hey, all. Hoddle T, Washington. Morning, my people. Hey, yo. Morning, my friends. Habib. What's up, Habib? Good morning, everyone. And King Mansa Musa with a morning from South Florida. You lived, King. You lived. You're doing great. Good morning. We made it, BTC. Now, let me just tell you, we got another foggy morning, but that's okay. The sun's totally up, right? We're good. Bitcoin's running, I'm told, 888 million transactions, so that's good. Right? We're doing great. All that's left for us to do is have a coffee and talk about what is new. Delicious. So we got a fun Moscow time as usual. Like when isn't Moscow time fun, right? We made our title yesterday on fog of war, right? We called it the fog of war machine, but it looks like the simulation has winked at us because Fox had an entire headline this morning. This is how they're going to solve the robberies taking place across American commercial space, right? So you see all these videos on Twitter. People walk into a store, they take whatever they want. Now they got to put everything behind glass, right? So Fox is telling us that a new tactic has come to crime fight, right? And what is it? It's a fog machine. It's a fog of war machine. So stores will actually, this is a Fox headline, fog of war. Stores are turning to the disorienting tactic to curb shoplifting. And indeed, crime-fighting fog hits shoplifters as retail theft spirals out of control. So there you go. The simulation winking. We like fogs of war here. This one's great, right? It's the thieving and this and that, right? What are we going to do? Runaway stuff, right? Other people say, well, maybe it has to do with inflation, right? Things are becoming expensive, all that kind of stuff. People wondering how the inflation was created in the first place. Well, the Globe in Canada, right? We regularly remind you that Canadians might be the dumbest people in the world. Their paper, the Globe and Mail, which is sometimes the largest, right? There's two kind of big ones. Truthfully, the city newspaper, Toronto Star, I think is the most read just because it's read locally. It's not read nationally. So this is the biggest national paper. And they've got some opinions here on inflation. So here's their opinion article in the Globe and Mail. No, cutting spending is not the way to fight inflation. Okay, guys, cutting spending, that's not going to do anything, right? It's not going to help. No, it's not. Cutting spending, no way. Here's a good one on MSNBC. So there's the convictions of the January 6th people are going on, and this fella here got 20. No, okay. So here, I'll read the whole thing in a second. He got 22 years in prison. He wasn't even at January 6th. There's a video of him saying he'll protest the election back in like November of 2020. Or he said protest the coup. Anyway, that's what they got him for. I guess he was a Proud Boy or something like that. But here's the MSNBC headline. It's awesome. It's great, right? Here it is. Prosecutors wanted to send Enrique Tarrio to federal prison for 33 years. They got 22. Read Shane Burley on why this sentence is still a win, hopefully. Here's the other headline. Enrique Tarrio's sentence was a little shorter than prosecutors wanted. That's okay. Thanks, MSNBC. That's okay. This one's great, right? This one we're just going to read straight out. I left out the full, this is from the Free Press. I left out the full truth to get my climate change paper published. I just got published in Nature because I stuck to a narrative I knew the editors would like. That's not the way science should work. Pretty good one. This one's also good. This is a little old, right? But it's still a good one. why heterosexual relationships are so bad for us, according to a sex researcher. So you didn't know? You didn't know heterosexual relationships were bad for you? Now you know. That's what I'm here for, guys. But we're getting into my favorite ones, right? These ones are just awesome, right? So the New York Times wrote this a few weeks ago. How New York's public hospitals cut carbon emissions, more vegetables. So that was in the New York Times a little while ago, right? They're really happy because it's got rave reviews, they say, but they're not done there, right? They're not done there. The mayor of New York had a press conference yesterday, and what was it about? Was it about the migrant crisis? Was it about runaway shoplifting? Was it about real estate mitigation plans when commercial real estate's gone? No, it was none of those things. Here's what the mayor of New York City said yesterday. Mayor Eric Adams vows to reduce New York City's food-based emissions at agencies by 33% in the next 7 years. So I guess the big problem in New York is the food-based emissions. Now, what I want to know is if they're going to deal with all the rats, because the rats also fart. Right? Did you know the rats have to fart too, just like the cows? So I don't know. They got to start thinking about the rat farts in New York if they're going to get serious about the food-based emissions. All right, because the rats are there to eat the food too, and then they fart, and then they got to do something. They got to do something. All right. So that's what we got today. That's what we got. That's our Moscow time. But the theme we have today is. Instead of governmental, we're calling it governmental agencies, right? You can be governmental, but we're going to be talking about governing psychotic agencies. So how did these agencies become so psychotic? How did they become mental, right? Well, no feedback loop. That's kind of our theme. We do have a bit of a board. It looks like I'm not great at my proportions because I haven't been doing it in a while. But you can see a typical feedback loop here, right? That says feedback loop. A typical feedback loop starts with action, right? You get some evidence after. Can you see that? Then we get some relevance, right? So that's numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. That's just prioritizing. Relevance is like prioritizing. And then, of course, consequence, right? So if this thing runs properly, you have a feedback loop and you can A/B test, you can iterate, you can grow, right? But what happens if there is no feedback loop? Well, if there's no feedback loop, what you end up having is evidence that doesn't have to be even intellectually quantified. Then you get relevance. No one can tell what's more relevant. When you can't measure stuff, you can't actually manage it. So if you're not actually looking at the evidence, then how are you able to even prioritize anything? And then if there are no consequences to your decision, that's how you end up listening to overweight people telling you how to be healthy and criminals telling you how to be good citizens, right? That's how you end up in these situations. And it looks pretty pervasive around our system now. And one of the ways you can actually quantify that this is happening, right, is just looking at numbers and evidence again, right? So one of the best ways to understand how mental our agencies have become is just to look at the supposed free press, right? So this is a pretty interesting frame, and this comes from yesterday's Joe Rogan with comic Dave Smith. I guess Dave Smith's been always involved in libertarian politics, and he's a pretty interesting guy. He should embrace Bitcoin a little more, I say, but he's not zero on it. But they had a pretty interesting conversation yesterday on. I think he's been on Joe Rogan. I think he goes on every year. He's been 5 or 6 times, right? So Joe Rogan does have a big sweet spot for comedians who are also politically engaged, and that sort of fits the bill. And that's why Dave Smith is there regularly. And I think he is a great guest and brings a lot to the table. I usually don't watch the whole interview when these ones happen. I just watch some clips. But here's what they said, right? So they found it amusing that CNN, with 200,000 viewers, labels Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan, who have millions of viewers and are considered the top figures in cable news and podcasting, as controversial, right? So this is the idea that CNN, with a much smaller audience, would speak for the majority when they're criticizing Tucker Carlson or Joe Rogan for being fringe or whatever it is they call them. So here's what comic Dave Smith said. He's the #1 guy in cable news, and you are the #1 guy in podcasting. How are you guys viewed as controversial? But CNN is talking to an audience of 200,000 people and letting them know that people are very skeptical of you guys. No, they are not. These are the most popular figures, and it's because people at least smell that you're not lying to them the way these guys are. What I appreciated about Tucker Carlson was that he would break from the Republican Party and break from the network, and that's so unheard of today. On MSNBC or CNN, if you look down the whole lineup, you cannot point to one host who has a drastically different opinion on an issue that matters more than the hour before them, right? So he's just saying here it's the same show all day, every day. But if you look at daytime on Fox News and where they were on war in Ukraine compared to where Tucker was, or where they were on lockdowns versus where Tucker was, it's a night and day difference. And so, of course, they remove the one interesting guy. Joe Rogan answered he was kind of doing podcasting on TV. He got to the point where his show was so huge that he could kind of get away with it. And he kept incrementally ramping it up until he was like, the CIA killed Kennedy, which is exactly when we started covering the Tucker Carlson and RFK campaigns. RFK had not even announced yet, right? But that episode last November, when Tucker Carlson actually tied Watergate to the Kennedy assassinations, and that's where RFK said this was the bravest journalism we had seen in American history. That was last November. That was the moment at which I said, well, maybe this RFK guy might actually be a big difference maker, not because of anything I knew about Bitcoin or him personally or anything like that. It really was just because narrative closure, this feedback loop looks broken from that point on, right? The moment Tucker Carlson made that show. Now, it could go much deeper. We don't know. But I think intellectually, we have all the evidence we need to approach this fourth turning in America if we go back to the JFK assassination story and Watergate and everything that happened in the 1960s. So that's where the feedback loop, to me, really becomes compromised and broken. Again, it might go back further. I mean, it looks like it goes back really far. It looks like it might go back right to 1776 or 1789 when the states were subjected to a federal government, and a federal government was foisted onto them by people like George Washington and the guy Hamilton and all these folks. Now, you know, I have a positive impression of Washington and Hamilton and these people, but I could be wrong. It could be from that point, America was never America. So it might go back that far. We don't know. But I think going back as far as JFK is good enough for our case, because it doesn't really matter how far it's gone on for. That the whole thing is a lie is what's important, right? And the feedback loop and the ability to gather evidence and prioritize and have some form of consequence to decisions people made doesn't exist when it comes to these institutions. And there's a quote that came across my timeline today, and it was Thomas Jefferson talking exactly about what happens when the banks get out of control. And I think it's relevant because that's the world we live in. Here's what he says, right? And remember, they're just starting to create the Federal Reserve at this time, right? The original, right? We talked yesterday about how there's been 4 iterations. Professor St. Oj, who will be a speaker at Bitcoin Amsterdam, October 12th and 13th. And he was talking about how Andrew Jackson was the last person to destroy the Federal Reserve once the smoke and mirrors were removed and American people understood what was going on with these banks. So here's what Jefferson said, right? And I'm sure you've seen this quote before. He says, "I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around these banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power of currency should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs." Indeed, when you do that, right, that's why we continue. That's why I'm a one-issue candidate, right? Vivek even yesterday comes out and says he's very positive about Bitcoin, so he gets my vote, right? Just like RFK gets my vote on the Dem side. I'm a one-issue candidate for this exact reason. All the other troubles we have, all the broken feedback loops and the ways that we want to administer our republic or society or whatever you want to call it, don't work when the feedback loop is broken. And like a person, right, like a human being, you can go psychotic from not having proper psychological feedback loops, from not having the proper consequences to your actions. When that happens, You end up not knowing what actions to take. You end up not being able to gather evidence or even quantify the evidence. You can't put it into any order that makes any sense. You can't find the relevance, and then the cycle perpetuates. I've often described Washington, D.C., the politics of Washington, D.C. This was before Trump, and something that I thought was important and relevant. And I first clued into it in the 2000 election. The 2000 election, imagine that. So the 2000 election, if there are some of you too young to remember, what happened was you had Al Gore, and George Bush Jr. Going at it, right? Now, the thing was, they agreed on everything. This was America further ahead of the rest of the world than maybe they've ever been, right? They were pretty far ahead in the 50s, but in the 90s, when communism fell, of course, America stood alone as a superpower in the world without any real serious challenge. And that resulted in most Americans sort of not paying attention at all to politics. Like it wasn't saturating our life. There was the Clinton with the blue dress and the cum stain and all that whole story, right? But who cared about that? It was just more, it was like watching a soap opera on television. So only some people were obsessed with it. And that candidate, Bill Clinton in this case, was gone. And so that's why you had these two new guys. And so there was really no distinction. If you remembered, or if you ever watched the Saturday Night Live episodes from that era, the joke was how they agreed on everything because there was literally no conflict or disagreement between them. But what I ended up saying that happened as a result of that is that because right and wrong in Washington, D.C. had started to take on its own gravitational sense, its own purpose, its own reality, and it had spun, because of spin, it had spun so far away from what normal people understand that most of the 2000 election was actually below the surface and unintelligible to people because the story of what was actually going on, the right and the wrong, the reality of it was no longer accessible. The spin had driven it so far away, and the spin really was spin within the feedback loop. The spin was breaking the feedback loop in a way that was practical and useful for other people. And that's why you had this situation where from then on, really not much in the world makes sense, right? From 2000 and 2001. Now, just a few years ago, I would never, ever have thought that there was some plot around 9/11. Now, I there's no way you could convince me otherwise, like at all, right? At all. So that's how much we have basically burned trust in our institutions and exposed them as uniquely psychotic. It's more psychotic than they've ever been. And it's this psychosis that's producing all of these ridiculous examples. I mean, just look at the people talking today. Now, I am not interested, right? Not interested in the sex life of Obama. All right, not interested. Right, I don't care. Just don't care. Right, I don't care about his sex life. So, some people talking because Tucker has now done this interview with a fella who says that he banged Obama and they did a bunch of crack and coke together in 1999. It said it happened on a couple of occasions. Now, first of all, we got to see some physical proof that they met, right? Like I think that's important. But some people saying they don't care at all about the story. And now I'm there, right? Doc Anarchy, who we're big fans of, Dr. Anarchist. So, oh, by the way, the account yesterday was zero sum 24. That's who you're looking for. So here's what Doc Anarchy says about what's going on. Why does Tucker Carlson think anyone cares about Obama banging dudes? Young people will think it's cool. Old people realize it's irrelevant. If this story excites you, please find better hobbies. So I'm kind of there, right? And he says it again. What I'm gathering is people care about this story for two reasons. One, proves he's a liar. Like we know, we don't exactly think Obama is an honest guy. Two, proves media are liars. And again, what do we not do Moscow time every single day? Do we need more proof that they lie, right? Doc Anarchy says, the guy married Big Mike. I'm not slightly surprised if he was banging dudes in the 90s. Would rather see Tucker hit more important topics. So I'm right there. I'm right there with Dr. Anarchy. But I will say the following, right? I will say the following. And I'm not saying it's absolutely important or it's something you've got to, sort of memorize and something you need to be so aware of. But here's what one fella says about it. And I think it's pretty interesting. Let me just find the quote. So this comes from Christopher Hill, right? So we're, definitely need evidence to believe the story. But here's what he says about this true part, right? That said, it's very important if true, not because of gay or straight, right? That's where I'm at. But because it would show the extent. So it's not that they lie. Lying I get, right? But it's not the same as lying. This is lying on command. This is lying when you believe things that are fake because you've been hypnotized. It's much more complicated than just lying. If it was just lying, I would say, okay, fine, right? So he goes on. But because it would show the extent to which our national narrative, history, and most importantly, direction is manufactured. Essentially, the words we use to describe how this country has changed and progressed over the last 30 years do not match the facts. And something like this would help people to accept the greater lies they've been told. That is a little more where I'm at. Now, I'm not out here. No one wants investigative journalism on Obama's sex life. I don't want a bunch of gotcha things, right? And I think there are other stories that could feed into this. And I do think this is not the smoking gun that would change anyone's opinion on a bunch of stuff, but it's true. It does give you a sense of how much stuff has been manipulated, right? Now we know it's manipulated. That's not what we need. It's not that we need proof that the media lies. As I said, we run a daily morning segment that's 5 minutes of lies that I can find. It doesn't take me 5 minutes to find the 5 minutes of lies, right? They're so abundant and so pervasive in our system. But it shows to what extent the feedback loop is broken. It shows to what extent that spin has actually created a sort of alternate reality. And that alternate reality is then sort of foisted on people. And that's how you end up in a situation like I was just mentioning, where you get CNN talking about how the biggest and most popular podcasts are actually lame and stupid, and with their tiny audience, they're somehow representative of the mainstream. That shows you how much of it is a construct and how much of it is a type of psychosis, right? The numbers don't matter. The truth doesn't matter. None of it matters. You can just lay down track and run narrative on top of it, which is how anyone who's involved in brainwashing operations would see this, right? You just have to lay the track down and you can get direct access into their minds and do what you got to do, right? So that's where we're at, right? We're at this point where that the numbers don't really matter. The truth doesn't matter. The reality of these things are not that important. And that's why, one of the weirder things about what we've seen with the pandemic or January 6th, have you seen the people who are like cheering these people going into jail? It's really chilling, right? Even in, the book that I've been working on for the past few days, my Bitcoiner's handbook to manipulating. Well, I haven't really thought of that. I haven't really figured out the name, but it is a Bitcoiner's guide to NPC management, or handbook, Bitcoiner NPC management handbook. That's sort of where I'm going with it. So it's how to divert and how to increase your freedom of speech around NPCs, how to increase your quality of life around NPCs. I call it toxic microdosing, right? You get toxic maximalism, but then you can't really live around these people because it's just chaos, right? If you're always like, you're crazy. So toxic microdosing is my approach, right? How do you get them to think and get out of the situation with just a little bit, right? But indeed, we get these people, cheering on Eric Adams in New York as if it's a priority to get rid of the beef, I guess, on menus, right? They want to serve more people vegetables. Or if it's, people laughing at Joe Rogan for having the largest audience in the world, or these kinds of things. Yeah. Toxic microdosing is genius, CK says. Yeah, no, that's what we're calling it, toxic microdosing. Let me even read you I'll give you guys a sneak peek. What do I call it, right? Yeah, this book is for Bitcoiners, and it's written with respect to toxic maximalists. While it is a noble road, some people prefer to live with some interactions with NPCs and fiat-centered people. This book aims for a toxic microdosing approach to enhance your freedom of speech and thought while surrounded by NPC sludge people. It's pretty good. Huh? I got all kinds of pictures and I'm going to be using some of the old images from my prompt thumbnails here. So some of them are appropriate. I got the one with that, a little bit overweight guy who's just chowing down on big, huge bugs, that one that I put up a few months ago. He's just like, yeah, because here's the point, right? None of us want to eat the bugs, but we also want to keep people from eating the bugs. And I accept that there will be people who eat the bugs, right? But for Bitcoin to win, we've got to get fewer people to eat the bugs, right? So we've even got to love the overweight bug eaters. We have to. We don't have a choice, right? We need some of them. We need a certain percentage of them. So there you go. So I'm glad you like toxic microdosing as a new approach, as opposed to toxic maximalism, right? Tommy says, why wouldn't the media celebrate Obama being gay? Another first, they can talk about it for months. It gives them an excuse to talk about Obama. It's coming. Yeah, Tommy, I'm not denying it. Yeah. So again, it's not that he did it. I agree with Dr. Anarchy here. Don't care, right? I just don't care. And I do want, there's no proof. It's just some guy missing teeth on Tucker Carlson talking about how maybe he had, how credible is this guy? I don't know. I just have no idea, right? And some people say, oh, Tucker should do something else. Maybe. But Tucker is involved in this, I think, wider story about how much of our narrative has been a lie and how deep this system goes, because it looks like people knew this years ago. Now, I don't know if it's true, right? And I don't care. That's not really the important part. If it is true, what happens to our ability to have any orientation in the way our system has worked for years? You can actually see at that point that this feedback loop has been broken for as far back as you can remember, right? If that's the case, if it's the case where not only was this hidden, but it's part of an overall, push. Seems like he needs to apologize to the community if it's true. Yeah, maybe. But again, my point here is just to show that the concert between media, government, people is so broken and estranged from reality that you have produced this sort of psychosis. Dr. Drew puts it perfectly, right? And Jessica Vaughn, who we love, had a really good follow-up to a thread on X. Some people call it Twitter. Some people call it X. Dr. Drew says the following: due to the pandemic, histrionic personality traits like seeking attention and excessive emotionality emerged more prominently. Fear-mongering by media amplified these behaviors, but why specifically did histrionic traits emerge more pronounced? He asked the question. Jessica Vaughn, I think, has the answer, right? So here's what she says. She says, otherizing people who didn't respond the same way to the propaganda made it most visible. Isn't that a perfect way of putting it, right? She's smart. It was consuming. Knowing it's not done makes the rest just below the surface instead of actually healing. We will never believe government isn't willing and ready to do this all again anytime. And that's what we see right now. Biden is going to be wearing a mask indoors. All these people are. Whoopi Goldberg's got COVID now, right? Alex Jones called it, right? We got COVID coming back soon. So this concept and histrionic personality disorder is that. It's the attention-seeking behaviors. It's the going online and laughing at people who are going to jail for January 6th, saying they should get more and all these things, laughing at the being addicted to Trump. 1 second. Sorry about that. Kids playing in the other room. It's going to be a short episode today, too, by the way. I've got to do the Bitcoin Magazine Spaces at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be talking about mining. We're going to be talking about energy literacy, all that kind of stuff. So, come join us at 9, but I need a few minutes before. So there you go. So, the situation we find ourselves in with this broken feedback loop leads to another part of the interview that I heard yesterday with And not only that, right? Here's Martyr Maid. I'll give you one more before I move the sticks here. So Martyr Maid says the following, right? And I think it's right on. He says the public is incapable of staying focused on any topic, no matter how sensational, for more than a few days. So these stories are just going to come and go and be forgotten. And that's this one about the fellow being in jail for 22 years, right? And Cernovich says to it, the gambit made by the DC Uniparty is that they have enough raw power and Stasi agents to arrest most everyone. Who cares what the public thinks? In the immediate term, this is true. It doesn't matter. They'll kick down doors and execute Trump voters and laugh about it. This sounds like an execution. Maybe there's more to it. Point is, they don't care. They kill. Oh, now he's talking about the thing in Utah, right? So this idea, and he's mentioning the Utah case just a few weeks ago, is exactly in line with this prediction that because there is no sort of accountability, it doesn't really matter, right? You just put on the next story and keep going. Now, what I'm saying is that's how we've ended up in a situation where these things are mental and psychotic and do not operate, and there is no feedback loop and none of that stuff, right? So now that brings us to the breakdown of the system, and we're starting to see it everywhere, right? If you think about this, what has to happen for this broken feedback loop to continue to work the way it was designed? So when I say it's broken, it's only broken for people who want to use logic and reason, right? If you actually see how the feedback loop operates, it still is tuned according to the people who designed it this way and spun things and are still managing the spin and are still spinning it with some form of accuracy, right? Now, I don't want to exaggerate their skills, but their ability to spin still relies on the anticipated predictable behavior of certain parties within the spin machine. And that brings us back to the ADL story that we were talking about yesterday, the Anti-Defamation League, that I think is going to get sued by Elon Musk for an extraordinary amount of money, which makes it funny and hilarious. But more and more people are coming out to show how this thing is actually totally broken. And it is connected to this histrionic story that Dr. Drew and Jessica Vaughn were just talking about. And it's this. This is Christopher Ruffo. So Christopher Ruffo is the guy in charge of that new Florida university that doesn't do any woke stuff and all that. So he says the ADL, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, uses the frame of identity and public goodwill to defame opponents of left-wing ideologies as a whole. The organization falsely marked me as an extremist for the very obvious and factually accurate claims that blah, 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 blah. So the conclusion he has is this has nothing to do with fighting anti-Semitism. The people who publish these baseless hit pieces are left-wing bullies, plain and simple. Their opinion on such matters should be assessed in the same category as Media Matters and other partisan oppo institutions. And indeed, Glenn Greenwald jumps in as well. The ADL is a highly politicized group. If you look on the FAQ page of Anti-Defamation League, the first line is a lie. We are a non-partisan, and you're like, well, all these pictures yesterday emerging of Greenblatt in Obama's office. He worked for Obama. They're coming out and saying nonpartisan. Well, maybe not, right? But if anyone would even think about that for a second, like, can they credibly say they're nonpartisan? Who would repeat the words they are nonpartisan? Only people who don't function within a proper feedback loop, but are functioning within a feedback loop that has been impressed upon them and injected into their brain through forms of hypnosis and brainwashing and however else. Whatever else, what other tool you need to pry a person's mind open and get information in there. So that's what we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with a situation that has zero feedback loop, has created this psychotic state. And now people and agencies and societies are similar to individuals, right? So societies are similar to individuals in that there is a type of personality, there is a type of collective unconscious, there is a type of unconscious element that helps motivate a state. And we've often sort of described that that subconscious shadow, if you want to call it that, in Jungian psychology. So just like a person, it is in a state has it too. A collective group of people has the same thing. And when their ability to process their unconscious is suppressed, you end up getting these really psychotic manifestations, right? Just as an individual, if an individual suppresses their shadow, according to all Jungian psychology, what you get as a result is a complete aberration and mental breakdown. That can exhibit itself and manifest itself in various ways. So you don't have to necessarily underline the symptoms of this broken brain, but it happens. So what we have here is the same thing, but on a state level. And that's why the broken feedback loops, just as Jefferson said, right, comes back to the money. It comes back to controlling the issuance of currency. It comes back to the ability to track this and understand the money itself as a feedback loop. The money itself becomes a way to order relevance and prioritize things. That's what makes it so important, right? If it's not, if you don't have that, you'll never be able to orient your actions. You'll never be able to even understand the evidence, because you're not going to be able to understand and prioritize its relevance. And the final result of that will be you don't know what to do, right? There are no consequences, and you'll end up having super unhealthy people telling you how to be healthy, right? Yeah, that's so that's the book. Yeah, how to talk to an NPC from a Bitcoiner's perspective. So the way I've ordered it is, first you have to identify them, and then more or less Bitcoin is in a remarkable Rubik's or Rosetta Stone, or Bitcoin can help you identify not only if someone's an NPC, but their entire payload of brainwashing. And what I mean by that is there are different ways that people react to Bitcoin. And by their answer, you can pretty much identify the type of NPC they are. And if you identify the type of NPC they are, their other opinions become very predictive, right? They come in a set. In general, they come in a set. There's hardly any variability in this. And then you can actually handle them by question. So it's identify whether or not they are NPCs. Secondly, you identify what kind of NPC. And third, you can now anticipate their question and answers and where they've been brainwashed. And then I've got a couple special sections on US politics and NPC Bitcoiners. There is such a thing. So how do you deal with them? So there you go. Thomas, there was no need to repair. The issue is Starlink has trouble when there's a thick cloud coverage. It's not so much clouds, it's how low the ceiling is. So how low the clouds are, because that will help determine how thick they are. And if they're too thick, the connection's no good. It's not bad for downloading. It's not great for uploading. But I will be headed back to Montreal today for a few days. So I'll be back on my high-speed cable internet. So I'm glad it was good today, and it should be good for a few days. And I will sort of generally time when I come out here for good weather. This was a bit of an exception this week because we had our agricultural fair and there was so much going on and it had to be out here and it was a lot of fun and blah, blah, blah. So last week was a bit of an exception. I have my visitor from Japan as well. So trying to show him around Vermont and this whole countryside. You can't make him spend this whole time in cities, for God's sakes. So we were out here, but other than that, it won't be like this, right? Yeah, here we go. Veterans Cannabis say histrionics personality disorder. Just add fake trauma and presto, distraction unlimited. Yeah. You're seeing it with the masks now. I mean, you're seeing it, right? But we'll see. As Cernovich, right? They think they can, in the immediate term, manage things this way and not really care. How much longer? Don't think it can go on much longer, right? Don't think it can go on much longer. That's just my opinion. But I could be wrong about it. So that's what we got. All right, team. I don't have too much more today. I'm going to be heading on our show this morning, 9 a.m. We'll be talking about mining. We'll be talking about some pretty cool stuff and talking more about Amsterdam. So I hope you guys can make it. I think it's going to be a good one. Let me see if I got any more stuff here. I believe the science. I mean, the New York Times, isn't that? That's a good one, huh? That's a good one. Christine, I'm glad you've come for some coffee and tea and sun. We love it. All right, team. I'm going to leave it with the toxic microdosing. We want to get that going out into the environment, right? We like that. We like that. It's going to be in the book, guys. The book's going to be good. The book, I'm designing the book to help advertise the show. It's a handbook. It's not like it's not as complicated. I'm not writing a huge research paper. It's just a fun. Narwhal Tacos, thanks for the convo. Long day for me starting right now, so have fun. Yeah, I got a long day too. The Wild Hustle, great show. Thanks a ton, man. I appreciate it. All right, everyone. Peace. See you tomorrow.